Hey, what's up everybody? Welcome to day 68 of commercial diving school. Today was day 3 of underwater welding week. So if you're new to the channel, make sure to subscribe, leave a like if you enjoyed this video, and leave any comments or questions for me down below. So for today, we basically set up the dive station for underwater welding as normal. We basically got all the leads hooked up to the generators and got the hats hooked up. And basically at CDA, the setup is you have basically 3 large, we call them towers, but each one is about 10 feet tall, and you're only underwater welding in 2 of them. The third one is actually where we did underwater cutting with the chainsaw, but the other 2 are for underwater welding. And we basically you got the guys that are on comms down below, and then they're looking through the window at the diver that's on the bottom. And then you have everybody that is tending up topside, and they're like basically above the tower. There's like a platform where you can stand on and everything like that. So what I did today was I didn't actually get to dive today. I found out that as we're getting through the week, I'm seeing that, it's more and more likely that I am going to get to dive again. I think we are going to get to cycle through everybody again, so there's a good chance I will get to dive again. So if you're interested in hearing about that, stay tuned for that, because it's a good possibility, hopefully by the end of the week. So I did get to 10 though. So basically when you're tending for underwater welding, you're up top-side basically holding their umbilical, but also you need to send them down either rods or send them down their chipping and chipping tool, like basically the hammer. I don't know if you guys seen the underwater, or not underwater, but the topside welding video where I'm chipping away at the welds and everything. Basically that tool is kind of on a rope, and it's linked to their brush so that they can chip away at the weld and then brush it off real fast to clean it. Whether you're sending that down to them or whether you're sending down their stinger and their ground. And basically what we were doing was we were welding on a plate, and then you're also welding on your project, which is a bunch of pieces of metal that are tacked together. And basically the ground you're using is a clamp, and we would clamp basically those 2 pieces of metal together on the ground and then lower that down to the diver, and then the diver would take off those 2 pieces of metal, set them aside, and then they would hook up their ground to the vise, or they could hook it up to the metal, whichever they prefer. But they would put it in the vise. Also, the type of rods that we're using, we're either using 70-14 or 60-13. Those are the 2 rods that we're using. I'm starting to see that the rods that I use so far is the 60-13s, and what I've seen so far is that the 70-14s might be a little easier to use, meaning that when you lay down your beads are going to look a lot nicer than your 60-13s. It's just harder to get it to be a good weld with the 60-13s, just from what I've seen so far. But basically, yeah, you send down the ground, and then when they're ready, you send down the stinger, and then when they're all set up and they got their ground hooked up and they got their stinger in hand, and then they insert the rod and tighten down the stinger and the rod, and they're ready to weld. You basically tell, when you're up topside, you basically stand by, but the guy on comms is communicating with the diver, and when the diver wants it to be hot, he'll tell the guy on comms that he's ready to make it hot. They'll throw the knife switch, and then he'll begin welding. I also wanted to tell you guys about the polarity of welding underwater. So when you're topside welding, it really doesn't matter which direction the electricity is traveling. Like you could have your stinger hooked to your ground, and you can have your stinger hook to your negative and then your ground to your positive, or you can switch them. And it just depends on the difference is when you stick your rod to something that you're welding, the electricity is either flowing up through the metal into your rod or it's flowing down. I personally like to hook up my stinger to my positive so that my rod is basically shooting the electricity down into the metal. I don't know why, I just prefer it that way. Maybe some other people do too, but when you're underwater welding, you want your positive to be to your ground, and they actually use an acronym called PIG. That's an easy way to remember. Positive is ground, PIG. So whenever you're hooking up your ground for underwater welding, you just remember PIG, and you'll remember that you need to hook up the ground to the positive. And we actually do something called a bucket test. And a bucket test is where you take a bucket, obviously you need a bucket for the bucket test. You basically get the bucket full of water, and then we insert the ground, and then we take the stinger, we put a rod in it, and we basically turn on the generator, and we stick the rod in the water, and then we throw the knife switch and close the circuit. What happens is the electricity will start to try to flow in the water. It'll start to, I don't really know what it's doing, but say you're inside the bucket, right? And your ground is right here, and the end of your rod is here, and the circuit is closed. Its electricity is flowing. Your rod will start to bubble at the end. That's how you test if you're running the right direction of polarity. And we do that every single time we hook up the generator. So at the beginning of the day, we'll do that to test if our polarity is correct. If it's wrong, the ground will start to bubble, and not the rod. The rod will not bubble at all. So that's how you know you hooked it up the wrong way. It's wrong to do it that way. I can't really remember the reason why, but it's just what you do. That's the way you run it for underwater welding. It's strictly one direction of polarity. Positive needs to be ground. So another thing is when when you're welding, it stays hot the whole entire time you're welding. So when you're underwater burning, basically when the diver is ready to burn whatever they're going to burn, they squeeze the trigger a little bit, and oxygen starts to shoot out of the tip of the rod, and you make it hot. They strike their striker metal, and then the electricity heats up the end of the rod, and then it starts to burn, and then you make it cold. So it's really only hot for about the time it takes for you to strike the end of the rod and make it hot. Underwater welding is different. You make it hot the entire time. So say they're ready to weld and not burn, say they're ready to weld, the diver will say go ahead and make it hot, and you'll throw the knife switch, and the circuit will be closed as long as they're welding. The whole time they're running that bead. Even if they stop and they want to check their weld real quick, make sure they're good and everything, and they want to continue, it's still hot. And the only time you make it cold is when they want to pause for a little bit, they want to set down their tool, they want to take out the rod and maybe change the rod. Then you make it cold, because you obviously don't want them to get electrocuted, which can happen. And I think I mentioned this a few times, but there's two different types of electricity you can feel when you're underwater welding. This is an unofficial type, but I just like to categorize it because one is very mild and one is pretty severe. The one is just like where you feel like a tingle, like I was feeling when I underwater welded. I was feeling like a little tingle, like you can feel some in your hand. At one point, I don't know, I think it was the rod I was using. Maybe like it wasn't completely solid, like maybe one of the flux, the outside material on the outside of the rod was chipped off or something. Maybe it just wasn't a good rod or something. But when I was when they made it hot and I was starting to weld, I could just feel a little tingle throughout my body, but it was so mild. The other direction, the other side of the spectrum, is where it shocks you. Like, you get between the stinger in the ground, or you turn your back on the ground, or something happens to where, like, maybe you touch the stinger to your hat because it's metal or whatever. You could definitely feel the full amount of electricity flow through you, and that's the other side, and that is pretty rare. Like, if you pay attention to what you're doing, that will not happen to you. The other side, where it's very mild, it feels a slight tingle, it's not bad at all, like literally at all. So if you guys are worried about that, or if you are going to school and you are worried about that, I wouldn't be too worried. Just pay attention to what you're doing and everything. But anyways, that's basically what we did today. Same thing we've been doing all week. You're either diving on comms or tending, and I was tending today. So that's pretty much all I have for you guys in this video. Stay tuned for tomorrow's video and Fridays and the weekends. Thank you guys so much for watching. Subscribe if you haven't already. Leave a like if you enjoyed this video, and leave any comments or questions for me down below. So thank you guys for watching again. Have a great one. I will see you in the next one. Peace.